We now call on committee member Lowell Cormier for our next induction, please.
He wants me to get Walsack again, Harry Burke. You still here, Walsack? Oh, you're probably at the bar. Good evening once again. John Gillis spent most of his formative years at 27 Ripley Street in New Waterford. For those unfamiliar with New Waterford, Ripley Street is in the St. Agnes neighborhood. Hard for me to even say those words. John's parents were Randy and Lillian Gillis. John had 4 siblings, Jed, Raymond, Ronnie, and Margaret Rose. Jed, Raymond, and Margaret Rose are deceased. John is married to his lovely wife, Yvonne Nee Kerrigan. John's sons, Blair and Bradley, along with his wife, Terry, are present tonight. His daughter, Laurel, and her husband, Derek McPherson, are also here. 3 of John's grandchildren are also present tonight. Welcome, Bretton, Beth, and Alicia. I hope you enjoy the evening. New Waterford has a reputation as a tremendous sports town, having produced many championship teams and high-caliber athletes. What's remarkable to me is not only the caliber of the town's best athletes, but also the number of all-around athletes this town has produced. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but just look at some of the athletes being honored here this evening. They excelled in everything that they played. John Gillis was a top-notch, all-around athlete. He excelled in hockey, baseball, soccer, basketball, and track and field. In hockey, John was a much sought-after commodity, playing with 4 teams in one season while in high school. When playing for St. Agnes, John would play defense on the first shift, and then he would play center on the second line. Much to the chagrin of his high school coaches Jim Fox Chesson and Chuck Shimo, John accepted an invitation to play with the New Waterford Stags in the local intermediate league. He was in grade 11 at the time and had a lot of success playing with the much older and more experienced players. Actually, John was sort of a hired gun, with the Stags providing free ice time and hockey sticks to their prized youngster. John got his introduction to soccer under the legendary coach Danny McSween. During John's grade 11 year at St. Agnes, that team was the finest high school team on the island. Many thought they were so good that they were favored to win a provincial championship. As the season progressed, the team lived up to its hype and dominated its competition. The team was certainly a force to be reckoned with as it got ready to enter the local playoffs. However, the team's fortunes came crashing down when it became known that the powers to be at St. Agnes forgot to register a team. Wow, what a sad ending to a soccer season for a bunch of high school kids. John attended Central High School for grade 12. John was the captain of the soccer team, and he continued to star in soccer. John was also a member of the basketball team at Central, the powerhouse aggregation, which included soon-to-be local legends Donnie McCauley and Dave McDonald, and they went on to win a provincial championship, a feat that seemed to be a regular occurrence at Central High School back in that time. Coincidentally, John ran into the late, great John King at a provincial semifinal in Amherst. Some in this room will fondly remember John King as he eventually moved to New Waterford and became a key member of several Strands teams being honored here tonight. John Gillis held John King to 4 points in that game, an exceptional performance given the caliber of player John King was. John was named Athlete of the Year while at Central, a considerable accomplishment considering the caliber of athletes at Central during that time. John was also an accomplished track and field athlete. At the Pier Road race in 1956, John finished second in the 16 under mile race. The winner was New Waterford basketball legend Richie Spears. In 1957, John defeated Richie and won the same race. In 1958, John won the open mile. John won that race by over 100 yards and drew the attention of a former British Olympic track star who happened to be a spectator as he was working on the boats. He offered John his compliments, and he was very, very impressed with John's running prowess. The Acadia Relays was a prominent track and field event in Nova Scotia. John had a strong showing at the competition, but felt he should have done better, but was hindered by his new running spikes, a gift from his coaches on the day of the race. Not a great coaching decision, as John usually ran in sneakers and had a terrible time adjusting to the new spikes. Anyhow, the winner came in at 5 minutes and 2 seconds. John had a training mile the week before in New Waterford when Dan McSween arranged for him to run up the track up behind Emerald Street there, and he had guys running the quarter mile with him, sort of pacing him, and he ran in 4:35. So John felt he should have won that provincial mile, but because of the running shoes, he just wasn't quite used to them, and it really, I don't know much about running, but apparently if you wear a different footwear, it's really going to throw you off. Baseball was also another sport that John excelled in. He got his start in Babe Ruth and played on a team with starry shortstop Roger Gillis. So I didn't realize, Roger, you were a force to be reckoned with. Yeah. So you were, yeah. No, anyhow, we'll leave it at that. John's baseball career advanced to midget, juvenile, and junior teams in town. Being one of the better younger players, John got a few call-ups to the senior team when the team was short of players for various reasons. John was also a member of the 1958 Mount Carmel. I'm not sure if it's junior or juvenile. I'm getting mixed up here because of what Gregor was saying. But anyhow, he was a member of a provincial championship team, and Gregor was on the team. A couple of anecdotes from my interview with John I thought I would mention were that John played in a tournament in Newfoundland, and at the conclusion of the tournament, he and another Waterford player were pitched offers, no pun intended, to stay in Newfoundland. The other player was Mike Roberts, so John was associating with some pretty good ball players, and he's a good enough ball player to be asked to stay in Newfoundland. He also tells me of a game when he was playing with the seniors when they called him up, when he was called in to pinch run for one Spike McKinnon. Can't imagine that. Anyhow, John stole second, advanced to third on a sacrifice bunt, and then stole home. John also played a lot of softball, starting with the number 12 Aces and the URT military training program when he was stationed in Falconbridge, Ontario, and Vancouver. In 1959, John attended Xavier College, where he was the co-captain of the basketball team. The other captain was Louis McKenzie, who went on to have an outstanding military career, eventually becoming a general. The coach of the Xavier team was Owen Kerrigan, who went on to become president of St. Mary's University. So John was hanging around with pretty influential people even back in those days. John continued on to St. FX, where he was a defensive stalwart on 2 maritime intercollegiate soccer championships in 61 and 62. As you already heard, Gregor McPherson was a scoring sensation on those teams. I'm going to digress a little bit, but I've always used university sports as a yardstick to judge athletic ability. If a local guy was good enough to play university sport, then he must be a very good athlete. I have done some calculations with some consulting with soccer gurus in the area, and New Waterford has had over 30 players play university soccer. For example, when Gregor was at St. FX, he won the scoring championship. Well, maybe a few years after that, David McNeil from New Waterford won the scoring championship. And a few years after that, Sandy Carney won the scoring championship. So think about that. So that's a testament to the soccer programs that were developed in New Waterford, both at Central, St. Agnes, Mount Carmel, and of course, Breton Education Center. John rounded out his career in soccer as a member of New Waterford Stags, winners of the Cape Breton Cup in the fall of '67. I was just out of grade 12 at the time, and I watched the championship game against the famed and also infamous Broadway Ramblers. It was by far the roughest soccer game I ever saw. There was blood everywhere. two competitive teams, neither giving an inch, and the Waterford guys eventually prevailing. John rounded out his career as a competitive basketball player in 1970 as a member of the Waterford Strands. That team won the Maritime Senior Championship at Mount Carmel Gym on Easter Sunday in a one-game, two-game total point series that ended up tied after two grueling games, with the Strands prevailing in overtime after the second game. The team has since been inducted into this Hall of Fame, as well as the Cape Breton Sports Hall of Fame. John is being inducted tonight as an athlete and a builder. His building career was also very impressive. John came to Mount Carmel as a practice teacher in 1963 and as a full-time staff member in '64. I remember him as a very serious practice teacher. Usually we would torment the practice teachers, but we didn't dare try anything with John. The next year, John became our full-time phys ed teacher. As phys ed teacher, he assumed a lot of coaching duties. I think John was a throwback. Much like local legends Eddie Gillis and Fox Chesson, phys ed teachers who coach everything. As I reflect on that, I find it amazing. I don't know if it was expected at the time, but to me it was exceptional. Most years at Mount Carmel, John coached both the boys and girls basketball teams, the boys and girls soccer teams. John even coached a golf team from Mount Carmel to a provincial title, as Paula and Shauna McPherson led Mount Carmel to a Nova Scotia Headmasters Golf Championship. Go figure. John organized the track meets and coached the Mount Carmel track team. This is interesting. He also organized a cheerleading team. That was back when cheerleaders actually cheered for their teams. Anyhow, he accompanied them to Port Hawkesbury where they won the Cape Breton Championship. I think Gail McDonnell was the captain of that team, I'm pretty sure. John had tremendous success as a coach at Mount Carmel. The boys' basketball team won the Provincial B Championship in 1966. Marshall Laveau did a great job of subbing in for John as coach in that championship series, as John had to make a tough choice. He had two teams. The girls were going to the provincial, so he had to travel with the girls, where they lost in the finals in Cheat Harbor. His soccer team won the Headmasters A Championship in 1967. Also in 1967, John's team finished second in the Nova Scotia Headmasters A Championship, losing to a tough West Kings team. More on that later. In 1968, John's boys basketball team won another Headmasters B Championship, demolishing, and I mean demolishing, the competition across the province. They were winning provincial championship by 30 and 40 points. That team was outstanding. So summing up John's resume, he won, while at Mount Carmel, his teams won two provincial basketball championships, one provincial soccer championship, one provincial golf championship in a 4-year period, and that's an outstanding record for a young teacher in his first teaching position. I had the privilege of playing on some of John's teams. Reflecting back on it, I wonder where he found the time. Coaching in fall and winter seasons, between games and practices, it's really hard to imagine. But it's true because I witnessed it. I know Yvonne also witnessed it firsthand, as they had a young family, which brings me to Bradley's birth. We were on a trip to West Kings for the Nova Scotia Juvenile Championship, and the team got storm-stayed in Antigonish on the way home. When we pulled over to the hotel, John received word that he was a father once again, as his second child, Bradley, was born while John was away with the basketball team. Wow, Yvonne, you're a saint. Hands up there, Bradley. Times sure have changed. Gary Brooks says he's on that. He was everywhere, that guy. John was a tremendous coach. He was way ahead of his time. He developed a great sports program at Mount Carmel. He was really cool under pressure. I mean, I'm not exaggerating here. This is the coolest coach I ever saw. He was unbelievably cool. And I remember during the West Kings series, they had won the first game of a 2-game total point. What a terrible series. By 14 points. So they beat us in their own gym by 14 points. They were a classy team. They had the blazers, the shirts and ties, the fancy warm-up uniforms, and their own radio broadcast crew. This is all true. The second game was broadcast back to the Valley. They didn't do the first game. And after 6 minutes of play, Mount Carmel was up 14-0. So basically, the series is now tied, even though it is only early in the game. John is sitting on the bench, his normal cool self, while the other coach, Clary Lang, is losing it. He's prancing the sidelines, his coat's off, the tie's off, and his shirt is sticking out. So when you juxtapose the two coaches, the contrasts are amazing. Anyhow, we lost the game by 4 points as 4 of our starters fouled out. They were just too big for us. But you would think that I would have learned something from this as I eventually started to coach. To be more like John and less like Clary. At the time, I thought he was nuts. And history would tell you that I grew into a taller version of Clary Lang. John was an astute coach who always looked for an edge. I remember we were playing the powerhouse QEH team in the tournament in Sackville, New Brunswick. It's a tied game with 10 seconds to go. We've got the ball, and John calls a timeout. We just get to the timeout, and John says, "Get ready, we're going to play right away." And I thought that was kind of odd. But apparently at that time, the timeouts were about a minute. And if you were the team that took the timeouts, you can decide when you wanted to play. Because John was noticing the QEH team, and they were dilly-dallying, coming out of the timeouts. The referee would say, "Play ball," and Burke, you know all about that, right? So they'd slowly come out. So anyhow, this last time he called a timeout, and so he said, "Get it back out there and play." He told the referee he wanted to play, and so the ref said, "Play ball," and they didn't move. He said, "Play ball one more time." They didn't move. He said, "Play ball one more time," and he gave us the ball. We threw it down the court for an unmolested layup. We won the game. Their coach, legendary Bob Douglas, went nuts. But we won the game because John knew the rules, and he was keen enough to observe QEH's methodical timeout habits. John ran a wonderful program. We felt like we were a first-class organization. We traveled more than other teams. We had nice uniforms. We were proud to play for John and our school. On that trip to Sackville, this is hard to imagine, but we drove to Sackville in a 14-seat limousine. John had gone down to Counter's garage. Some people wouldn't remember that, some people, younger people. And that's where Ross's is, I think, or it was on the other side. And he KFC, is it? Yeah. And he coaxed Sammy Counter into giving us his limousine. So you can imagine, John pulls up. My father went on that trip with him, and we're up at the school waiting for him to come, and he shows up in this limousine. We were losing it, okay? So wherever we'd go, we were thinking we were the Globetrotters. In Antigonish, when we pulled in, somebody outside, "Here's the Globetrotters." One quick look, they would realize we weren't the Globetrotters. Anyhow, John, as a coach and an administrator as far as sports goes, was very well organized and very effective. He definitely had our attention, and above all, he had our respect. In 1970, John went to Beck as department head in phys ed. He had played a part in planning for the school, especially the gymnasium and soccer field planning. Art Timmons told me earlier today that John was a fantastic leader of a physical education program. He said that their program with John, with all the extra courses and all the things they were doing, were way ahead of the other schools in the province. So that's a testament to John's planning and his ability. He coached several teams at Beck and ended his career coaching some very talented girls' teams. John was also the vice chair of Colbo for a period of time. He was the president of the local chapter of International Board of Referees. He served as president of the Waterford Minor Basketball Association, vice president of the Waterford Minor Hockey. In 1994, John accepted a position at Mount Carmel Elementary. His time at Mount Carmel was brief as the government initiated an incentive retirement package, which John accepted and retired after 35 years of distinguished years as a teacher, administrator, and mentor to hundreds of New Waterford students. I want to thank everybody for bearing with me. There is one more anecdote I will share before wrapping up. John was not only a wicked coach, he and Yvonne were wicked neighbors. They moved into the other end of our company house in the early 70s. I was at X in those days, and the summers were a bit on the wild side. Every time my mother would go away, I would throw a party. Now you can imagine the noise level next door at John's, and they had a young family. My father was a photographer before he passed away, and we had this big, huge dark room built onto our house. So when I threw a party, I would lock all the furniture up in the dark room. I would arrange for a high school girl who was a friend of the family to come in and clean up the next day. John was ahead of his time in coaching, but I was ahead of my time in party planning. Many times, New Waterford's finest, Dale Carney, Tate Springall, Angie McIsaac, were called to the house. And I can tell you this, I don't remember John or Yvonne ever getting mad or complaining to my mother. Looking back on it now, they must have gone through hell. And if you look out across this room, there's a lot of perpetrators in attendance. Do you want to stand up? Anybody going to claim that? Anyhow, John, Yvonne, Blair, Bradley, Laurel, I'm issuing the Gillis family a formal public apology. On a personal note, I would like to thank John for all the guidance he gave me over the years. There's nobody I have more respect for. John, you were an exceptional athlete and a tremendous builder. You were a huge asset to this community. It's my pleasure to invite you to come forward to accept your plaque signifying your induction into the Waterford District Sports Hall of Fame. Congratulations, John.
No, I did. I had a little picnic table. That's crazy when you think back. Me too.
All right, folks, just have your attention, folks. John's going to say a few words.
I'd like to thank Lowell for all those lies that he's been telling people up here. But there is much I'd like to talk about. There is much I could recount about my coaching and playing and everything else. Lowell says start again. Can you hear me? How about if I do this? No, I better not. Okay. Except I'm wired the wrong way. There's much I'd like to talk about, but to be a good administrator or a coach or a judge, you have to be able to look at the room and just see what the temperament is. And I'm quite sure that you people wouldn't want me to drone on about everything else. I had a speech here, by the way, and somebody took it, and I said to Lowell, "Where's my speech?" Oh, he said, "We're sorry, Gregor took your time." But, you know, there are a few things that have to be said, and you have to recognize individuals, which I don't like to get into. But down the back there is one Marshall DeVoe, and that's the guy who was an extreme help to me. And whenever I asked him for anything, whether it was to drive or to help coach or do whatever, he was there. So Marshall, thank you. And also down back there, or she was there, maybe we bored her and she left, was Margaret McClellan, and she was a member of the Terrible Trio. We had Lowell's mother, Anna, and we had Margaret, and we had Janie Hutchison. And two of the referees in those days were Red Bob McDonald and Fred Mills. And then when they came in the gym one day, they passed me. I was sitting on the bench. And of course, the Terrible Trio was on the stage screaming insults like, Red Bob, you're blind, and Freddie Mills, you're a crook. So they passed by me and they said, man, you're lucky. They're on your side. And that was about summing it up. But as I said, I'm not going to stand here and bore you with any statistics. But you often wonder, you know, what kind of an effect you've had on people and whether what you're doing really, you know, says anything. And that was kind of brought out to me at one cold bowl. I was sitting in the gym on the far side, right in the mid-floor, and it was halftime, and there was a ruckus at the door. And this guy came in, and he sort of burst on the scene with his red coat, his leather coat, and his fur collar. It was Lowell's twin brother. And he made his way around the gym. And every time somebody addressed him, he assured them, you'll be all right. And he got around, and the crowd followed him all the way around. He got in front of me, and he stopped. And he pointed his finger like this. He said, there's the man who made me the man I am today. Now, before I leave, we have another coach here. And she raised her own team. Okay? And that coach is down there. Yvonne, come on up.
I hope you heard that.
No, I didn't hear a
He's
thing.
gonna kill you.
That's what I said. That's what I said. I'm just fine. How are you? You could just say thank you. That's all. That's all, yes. Oh my God, look at that. Oh, isn't that nice? I'll keep you.
Well, while I was out on the road having a good time with all these teams, she
I
was
was
home
home.
raising her own team. And for that, I am always grateful.
Yes.
And by the way, we've been together since grade 10.
Can you imagine? Grade 10. Oh, I guess I'll keep them.